Welcome back to Trafficking Truths, our Mythbuster campaign. I'm Rebecca Bender, and today we're going to talk about Myth 6. Sensationalism helps raise awareness. Well, does it? I have brought on 4 of my friends, incredible survivor leaders, authors, abolitionists, CEOs. You name it. There's so much wisdom that's coming in this next interview. I cannot wait. You might be asking, what does survivor leadership mean? Well, I'm glad you asked, because we're actually going to get into this today. Not only are we going to talk about sensationalism, but we're going to give you some key phrases and words that all advocates should know in the space of human trafficking. Please welcome 4 of my special guests, our abolitionist from New York, Melanie Thompson, Avery Center co-founder Megan Lundstrom out of Colorado, and Elevate Academy's Tara Madison out of Florida. Welcome. Today, I am so excited, you guys, to bring with us activist and survivor leader Melanie Thompson. Melanie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Talk to me. You've been in the movement for a long time, even though that you have this giant career ahead of you. I mean, I cannot wait to see where you go in life. I'm so excited. Talk to me about this field. Can sometimes it can be hard to navigate, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and your perspective on sensationalism, tokenism, re-exploitation within the nonprofit sector. It's not an easy field to be in. And I think sometimes allies and advocates that are new in learning about this issue, they don't realize sometimes the struggle that survivors have had to go through to even still find our place in this field. Can you talk about those things?
Absolutely. And this is a conversation that I think is not being had enough when we're talking about working in the nonprofit sector with survivors in these types of programs. Tokenism is definitely something that I see on both sides, both within the survivor community and from the orgs that we are working with. And nobody ever wants to re-exploit somebody, right? It sounds terrible. Nobody wants that. Nobody feels that they're doing that. But again, if you look at exploitation and re-exploitation as just pimps and not recognizing that it can translate into the business field, then you're not going to see yourself as being somebody that's doing that. So oftentimes these organizations, and I get it, it's hard because with the nonprofit, you have to fundraise for your own organization. You're 9 times out of 10 thriving off of sponsorships, donations, grants.
Yeah,
so
not easy.
It's not easy at all. And in order to appeal to donors' pockets, they want to hear the story. They want to know, you can give them the numbers and the stats, but they want to hear from the people that you claim to serve, or they want to hear the narratives of the people that your organization seeks to help. So as a nonprofit CEO, as a founder, I need to put somebody on the mic to appeal to the people that are going to give us the money to keep serving you.
Right.
But in doing that, this is not a regular business that is dealing with items, right? You're dealing with people with human feelings, human emotions. And when you constantly put a survivor up to keep telling their story over and over and over again, and then trying to edit it and then saying, well, that was all amazing. I'm so sorry you went through that. You're strong, but don't say this. Or can we switch this word for this word? So now you're putting me up on the stand, right? In my brain, you're putting me back on the stand to repeat. Then simultaneously you want to edit that. So you're censoring what I can and can't say to make your org look better, when you don't realize that that's taking a toll out of me every time you put me back on that stand. And it is so emotionally draining. And this is why my hat's off to you, myself, and all survivors that are doing this work. Because not only do I have to, when I say fight the good fight, right, with the world, and try to teach everybody that this is not a true choice, I have to deal with that while still trying to process my PTSD, my traumas, and still be strong enough to appear on the mic to tell the world,
Right.
a little bit about my personal life.
It's a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you for having me.
Welcome. Today, I am so excited to bring you guys special guest, survivor leader, activist, advocate, Tara Madison from Florida. Tara, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I would love to have you share a little bit about some of the sensationalism that's happening today as a survivor leader. Maybe this myth that we're bringing you on predominantly is all about words that advocates should know. And so I'd love if you could take some time to talk about what is survivor leadership, what is sensationalism, re-exploitation, tokenism, what is survivor informed versus survivor led versus peer reviewed. Like there's all of these things in the field that I don't think advocates are really aware of. So when they first step in, it's really new for them to see like, oh, wait, there's this whole group of survivors, because people think that survivors don't want to share their story. And I hear that so much. People are like, oh, well, we didn't bring any survivors because, survivors just don't want to tell their story. And I'm like, what rock are you living under? I know hundreds of survivors that are like begging to have their voice heard. You're not being a voice for the voiceless. You're taking the voice of somebody else that's very competent and able to share their story.
Yeah, exactly. And just really quick, I want to clarify that when we talk about the myths of trafficking and the red flags and what to look for in trafficking, it's so important that we understand the culture and the demographic. Because what we just were talking about with the Epstein case is what I experienced working domestically with minors in the United States. Now, when I was working domestically with minors overseas in Cambodia, Vietnam, those are hubs for child sex tourism. So the children in the safe homes that I was working with were literally like 8 months to 15 years old. So I like the age group that I worked with was quite a bit younger. We were overseas, but it's so important to know those elements wherever you are, because if I went overseas and tried to look for what I'm looking for domestically, wouldn't really work out too well. And vice versa. This sensationalism, the reason why it's sensationalized in the United States is because we're taking this like Eastern view on things, like what we've seen on the East and the West and in other countries, and we're equating it to the United States. And that's just not how it looks. There's more technology. Every child has an iPhone in their hands, which is how exploiters get to them, through social media. So yeah, we just have to keep that in mind. Like all of it happens, but we really need to look at, what region of the world that we're living in.
Yeah, and I wanted to read the definition of sensationalism because I think it matters what you're talking about. And it matters not because someone's done anything wrong. Like people that have, if you've pictured human trafficking, like Tara's saying, that you view it, what we're seeing, what she's seen, what lots of people we know have seen in another country, and that's what you're picturing in your community, that's normal. Like people have done that, but that's why we're doing these, is because we want you to know that's not typically what it's going to look like in your town today. You're going to have, and if we're only looking for that, you're missing your very child that could be coming home at 15 or 16 after hanging out with their friends, and they could have been being trafficked that entire time, and you might not miss. We have people on our team, I mean, Kathy Bryan, Lexi Smith, all of which were trafficked while going to youth group on Wednesdays, while going home for dinner every night, and we're missing it. We are missing it. So sensationalism, I just had to pull this up because I thought it was brilliant. The definition of sensationalism is the use of exciting or shocking stories or language at the expense of accuracy in order to provoke public interest or excitement. Oh, yeah, what are we doing? How does our feel? Yeah, like explain how that looks. I mean, in what's happening right now, why we're having to do these Mythbuster campaigns.
Well, it's this simple. If you go into your phone, into your laptop, and hit Google and type in human trafficking and click images, the first dozen and more images that you are going to see are children bloodied and beat up and with ropes around their ankles and their wrists, and they're in cages, and all that's what we think is sensationalism. It's an advertisement that's trying to grab your attention at the expense of the truth. Because if they just put a 13-year-old girl in her school clothes on that flyer for that charity event that's raising money for human trafficking, your heart might not be moved. But if you see
it's not evoking excitement, like, yeah.
Yeah. And we have to pay attention to that, because that's such a big, the media has a lot to do with why we're missing the mark. And there's just, we're getting flooded with information. We're getting flooded with misinformation. So many of the graphics, whenever I do consulting work with different nonprofits and trafficking aftercare programs, and, that's one of the first things we talk about, get rid of those images. It's not helping the cause. It's not helping the anti-trafficking movement make a difference in this.
Right. And I appreciate that so many people really want to learn how to keep kids safe, but I don't think people are realizing maybe how resharing some of those sensationalized images is actually fueling a potential misidentification. Can you share a little bit more about what people should look for, how we can do better? If you really want to help, how do we help people identify when this is happening? It's not through sensationalism. It's not by resharing some of those images you just discussed. What are some of those consulting tips you give other nonprofits that you could give viewers and listeners today?
As far as identifying survivors?
Yeah, and why it matters. What's the big deal if we share a picture of someone with handcuffs? What's the big deal?
Well, that absolutely matters, because then that becomes the snapshot in someone's brain of what trafficking looks like. So if the neighbor's child seems to have had a massive personality change in the past year, went from being a really great student to flunking out, to falling asleep in class, to having expensive items they've never had before, and cell phones, multiple cell phones. Those are the things that we need to be looking for. And if that mental snapshot is of that sensationalized picture, we're never going, we don't have the right tools. That doesn't match up with the tools of identifying child sex trafficking in the United States.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to bring today co-founder of the Avery Center, Megan Lundstrom. Megan, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Megan, you have done a ton of work in the anti-trafficking space, and you also have a lived experience with being a survivor leader yourself. I'd love if you could share with people that are tuning in, just, what you're bringing, all of it. The Avery Center, this is your second thing that you've been involved in. You've done a ton as a trainer, a curriculum writer. You have a huge resume. Would you share with everyone all that you've done?
Yes. Oh, geez. I should have had my Vita or something pulled up so I can remember. It's been a wild 6 years. So I originally founded what is now the Avery Center, but was originally Free Our Girls back in 2014. And that started off doing a lot of just trainings and educating the community on the issue of sex trafficking. From there, we started offering direct services. So we have a job program, a care package outreach program, peer support groups, and intensive care management. And then I just this year finally published our financial literacy curriculum, which is the first of its kind. That's been like a 4-year project, and that's finally done. And now really stepping into academic research.
I'm so excited. I cannot wait to put your literacy curriculum into the Elevate Academy. I know we've talked about, like, when is it going to be done? When is it going to be done? It's so needed. The topic of financial literacy, especially for people coming out of what's known on the streets as the game or the life, depending on if you're East or West. It's so needed because people don't realize. I can remember just getting a bill for the first time and being like, oh, I didn't even know what it normally would cost a month to keep my lights on. I didn't even know, because you're just used to your trafficker making sure that you have a place to stay, and you don't realize how much like rent is. You literally don't even know. It's that embarrassing.
Yeah, yeah. And so many triggers with just reintegrating into a traditional workspace. So yeah, looking at that paycheck at the end of the week and you're like, this is it. What am I supposed to do with this?
Right.
Learning how to navigate like HR when you have a complaint. You don't learn those things in the game.
So today I wanted to talk to you about some of these words that every advocate and ally should know in the field. Could you first start by maybe helping everyone share, or teaching everybody rather, what is survivor leadership? What does it mean to be survivor informed, survivor led, survivor inclusive? I think we throw those terms around a lot as survivor leaders, but to allies or new people coming into the space, you know, they're like, I don't even know what survivor leadership means. Like, does that mean I poll women that are, or boys or girls that are currently actively receiving services? I'm like, no, probably not. So share with us a little bit about survivor leadership in its entirety.
Yeah. Oh man. I think we need like a whole hour just to talk about that. To me, I use the ladder of participation, and I'm totally forgetting the creator's name right now, but we have it up on the wall in our office. And so this ladder starts, the bottom rungs are like just tokenism at the bottom. So just using an individual, not in an empowering way, using it to benefit the agency or another person. From there, you have survivor consulted. So an organization or group may reach out to a survivor and get some anecdotal feedback that they integrate, or they may be developing a program and they ask survivors to maybe review some founding document for feedback. So the project or the idea still originates with somebody who's an ally or a non-survivor. And so they're bringing that idea from their own creation and then asking for feedback and input. And then when you really get into like survivor-led initiatives, that is really where survivors are coming up with the idea and allies are coming in and supporting that process. And so just a super simple, very current example of this was we started doing research back in 2016, 2017. And what I saw locally was the need for housing, which I think everywhere across the country, there's a housing crisis for trafficking survivors, but just a housing crisis in general. And so we started collecting data at that point in time of what were needs of trafficking survivors specifically, and looking at housing and how that might fit into it. And so from that data, we submitted a federal housing grant. I have an ally who is an incredible grant writer who contracts with us. And so she wrote this grant. Dr. Angie Henderson was the one that collected the data for this research. She's also an ally. And so they saw my vision and they supported it. And as of last week, we were just awarded that federal housing grant to provide housing and kind of a continuum of services, so not just housing, here in Colorado. So that's a survivor-led project where it was a survivor's idea, it was survivors' voices, and it was really these allies coming in alongside that and moving it forward to this place of realization. I think in terms of like survivor-centered, that can look really different in a lot of different spaces. So one of the things that we have is our job program. And it was developed by me. It's within a, so it was survivor developed. It's within a survivor-led organization. But when we talk about survivor-centered from that context, I'm really looking at, it's no longer about me, it's about the program participants. What do they need? And how can we empower them in that space and give them a sense of control and the ability to take initiative and come up with their own ideas for improving systems. And so to me, like that's where that survivor-centered activity can really come in, because I could just say, well, it's survivor developed, it's in a survivor-led organization, so you need to follow what I said. The reality is it's not to benefit me, it's to benefit the program participants. So their voices need to be included ongoing.
I love this. Can you talk about survivor informed? Sometimes we hear, and maybe that's similar to a survivor consultant or advisor, but we see a lot of survivor advisory councils kind of popping up throughout the movement. I think this is fabulous. And so share that one more component, I guess, because you've shared more than I even knew about. I'm like, oh, I need to take notes. Where's my pen, girl? I ain't texting, I'm taking notes. But what is survivor informed? Can you share what that is?
Sure. So to me, survivor informed is it's one step above kind of that survivor consulted. So it's above just, okay, we're going to check in with a group of survivors or one or two survivors for anecdotal feedback, but really we're going to come up with a project and figure out how to integrate survivor voices and expertise throughout it. So one of the examples that I always give, I actually do a training on this ladder of participation. It's required for all of our volunteers, all of our staff members to really understand, because I think this is such a core component to quality service delivery in this field. The example I always use is Polaris Project, or Polaris. They have such a fantastic, like, survivor informed model. One of the projects that I got to consult with them on was the development of an internal document around how they do research and how they connect with survivors and move through a research project. And so bringing that intersection as a researcher and a survivor into that space, Polaris knew we need to develop these procedures, but we need survivor input to shape them. And so I was just one of many survivors that was a part of that process from the beginning, like brainstorming and looking at other similar models to creating the documents and reviewing them and then finally approving that final draft. So that's what survivor informed can look like, is really this like continuum of involvement from survivors.
Yeah. Or project centered, as you talked about, right? Like, we're going to bring a group in for a specific amount of time to see this project all the way through and make sure survivor voices are included, lived experiences are included. And then we also see things all the way up to other nonprofits. I've seen multiple nonprofits that will have like a survivor advisory council, almost like a sub board, not a governing board, an advisory board, but it will specifically be seated with survivor leaders. Oftentimes choosing survivor leadership that comes with the lived experience that may be specific to the anti-trafficking group's mission. So if they focus on child exploitation, they may put survivor leaders on that advisory council who were trafficked as children. Not always, but I think sometimes. And I think that's great, because I was only trafficked one way. I do work with lots of people, but if you're going to ask questions that are very specific toward maybe like foster care reform, I would recommend someone else. I wasn't in the foster care system. I don't work a ton in foster care. I know a lot of people that do. And so when we have got those opportunities, I'm generally like, actually, I'd love to introduce you to so-and-so, because I think that they have more of a lived experience with navigating the child welfare system than I would be able to bring to that advisory seat, you know? And so, man, I love this ladder of participation. Do you have that as a great graphic on the Avery Center's Instagram that we'd be able to reference when Myth 6 comes out?
I will talk to our director of marketing and make sure that file is locatable.
I love it. And I think another thing that we talk about, not just within, I'm sure, that ladder of participation, but I'm taking notes. So you guys, if I'm looking off to the side, it is not at my phone. I noticed I did that with another interview and it looks like I'm texting, and my husband was like, you need to get more obvious that you're like writing. I'm like, I can't be extra. It's like, you're extra on everything else. You can be not extra on note taking. But even in regards to this ladder of participation in employing survivors, right? That it's not just tokenizing and employing them, but making sure that there's seats at the table and that you're creating job opportunities, that you're walking that talk of overcoming hurdles, not just like, oh, you should help survivors overcome hurdles, but not here.
Yeah,
one of the
absolutely.
things, sorry, go ahead.
I think it's really, I think people are eager to help, but not really understanding like the systemic barriers that survivors encounter even after exiting. Life isn't fixed. Marginalization still happens. Oppression still happens. those barriers are still there. So as an example, creating a job post in a community that maybe doesn't have any direct services or any general awareness to trafficking, and saying, well, we're trying to hire survivors, but nobody's applying for it, therefore maybe survivors don't want this. Recognizing and taking into account, do they have access? Can they, if they have to move somewhere, like go somewhere geographically, is transportation available? Can they take public transit? Is there a transportation stipend? Is it accessible for them? Is it actually truly accessible? Because it's one thing to just say like, we're doing these things. It's another to like really dig in and figure out how to do them well.
Yeah, so good. And you come with such a researcher brain in general. I mean, have you found that, and my brain doesn't always work like yours. I'm kind of this strategic builder and I'm like, move, come on, we can do it. And then I'm like, oh, we should have assessed a little more. Do you find that sometimes, and this might be where we get a little bit into some touchier sensationalism, re-exploitation, tokenism. I want to believe the best about people often. I want to believe, and someone told me a long time ago, you cannot enter this field and be so arrogant that you would expect that everybody should become an expert when they had their HT 101. You have to give people time to grow and learn. And that really hit me when I thought, you know what, how am I making space for people to become experts in this field if I'm getting frustrated with them the first time they just don't know? And so, you know, personality is part of that, as we just said. Like, I don't have necessarily always that personality, like slow down, assess, research, gather data, you know, reflect. That's not, you know, you have that. That's why you're so good at research. What would you say about this in general? Like, as we move into helping people learn more, we want people to, like, there's no one's upset at anyone. We all know that we're just learning. What would you say to people that are just getting into the field that just don't know about some of these new this new language that we're introducing today?
Oh, geez. I'm definitely, I can relate to you, Rebecca, because I'm a let's just build the plane while we fly it kind of a person, which seems super counterproductive to the research part of me. So I have a lot of like daily cognitive dissonance of I need to sit down and figure this out and find the answers, and just the excitement I just want to start this project and jump in. So remind me your question, because I was just giggling listening to you.
Yeah, it's so hard. I know. I want to hear from you what you would say to people that are just now getting into the field. They're hearing some of this language for the first time. What kind of advice can you give to some of the new advocates that we have tuning in?
I am going to channel Anna Smith. She has been such an incredible friend and colleague over the last year. And I think one of the things that I wouldn't say she has called me out, she has called me in, and kind of been like, "Ooh, girl, your privilege is showing," like, you know, but in a very loving and like supportive way. So I didn't feel attacked by her. I felt like she was engaging in like conversation. But we had multiple conversations where I kind of was like, I don't know if I agree with that, or like, I guess I need to do the research on that before I'm ready to accept it. And she would say, I'd encourage you to sit in that discomfort for a little bit. And the first time she said that, I was like, excuse me? But I went home and like, I was just uncomfortable with this new perspective that she had presented to me. And I just sat with it. And I think in general for just our culture, like that's not something that we do. I don't think we do that as humans. We don't want to be uncomfortable. So being uncomfortable and being vulnerable, that's where we learn, because we have to be open to new ideas and willing to have our old ideas or even just like preconceived stereotypes or stigmas really challenged. And it can make you think through all the times in your past where you've been like, ooh, I said this, or I thought this coming from this perspective, and that doesn't align with what I'm being told now. So I really would encourage people, like, sit in that discomfort for a little bit, because that's where you're going to learn. And I think it's important, like you said, to engage people in just dialogue. I have a habit of, I call it fire hosing people with information. So I want to get as much information as possible down people's throats in as short a period of time. And the reality is that's not how we learn, especially with these big, huge, complex concepts. We need little pieces at a time that we can actually chew up and digest and like really absorb and be like, okay, I've got that.
Thank you again so much for coming. You guys, that's a wrap. I want to thank our sponsor, #RealityCheckIt, for bringing all of this information to you today. Please make sure you check out our YouTube page where all of these guests have their entire full-length interview. And if you like what you're hearing and you like what you're seeing, please share it on social media, tag a friend. We want to get this information out to everybody that's interested in this topic. And stay tuned for an upcoming podcast where we explore all of this into anywhere where you watch your favorite shows. Thanks again.
Have you ever wondered what it's like to start over with nothing?
Human trafficking. It's the largest social justice issue of our time.
What happens to women and children after they escape, after they complete a program?
How do you start life over again with a renewed sense of purpose?
Elevate Academy was birthed from that.
Elevate is an online school that offers courses, mentors, small groups, in-person chapters, homework activities, and job opportunities.
So that survivors of human trafficking can start to actually dream again and then create steps to get there.
By partnering with us financially every month for 1 year, you not only change the course of a survivor's life, but also her children and her children's children.
But it doesn't stop there.